Welcome back to the Blueprint to Ultra podcast with your hosts, Jeff Winchester and Steve Epifano. We are so glad to have you join us on the show today. The goal of the show is an ultra running show, and it's really to help you put the pieces of your ultra running puzzle together because we recognize that not all of us know what we're doing. We're not all elite athletes. We're not all professionals. And so what we do is we interview a variety of guests, all with the hopes of being able to snag a small piece of their story that we think you can add to your own personal blueprint. Our guest today has an incredible story. Having had a full liver transplant in March of 2018, he lined up for his first half marathon 7 months later in November. He then ran his first 50K in December of 2021, and most recently completed the first offering of the Arizona 300 that we're going to definitely dig into and kind of talk about. Because how do you go from a 50K to the 300? We definitely want to understand that. He describes himself as not naturally good at this sport, not fast, and not overly athletic. But what he will tell you is that he knows how to suffer and how to reach goals that he sets. And that sounds like the perfect ultra runner in my mind and Steve's mind, and we are excited to kind of get to know him more. And so without further ado, please join me in welcoming our guest today, Mr. Kelly Thrush. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Oh, man, thanks guys for having me on. I'm super excited. Big fans, so I'm glad to be here and chat with you guys today.
Excited to have you.
Yeah, we're definitely looking forward to the conversation. Listen, we normally start with asking our guest about their running background and stuff, but I can't really do that because I threw out in the very beginning of the introduction that you had a full liver transplant in 2018. So I'd like to kind of start your story there. If you could kind of fill in this understanding of how, because I'm looking at you on video here. You seem to be a very healthy adult. Like, how did you end up with a full liver transplant 6-7 years ago?
Sure. Well, it actually kind of coincides with the running beginning and start too. So, for the most of my adult life, I ran bars and restaurants, and that is quite the party atmosphere and culture. If you've ever worked in one in the hospitality industry, it's part of the culture. And I figured out at a very early age that I was really good at beer drinking. And not only that, boy, I thoroughly enjoy it. And so that beer drinking escalated throughout the years up until finally I was in my mid-30s, and it was a problem at that point as it escalated. And finally in 2018, I was 38 years old. It was January 7th, if you want the day, where my liver finally said it had had enough. And it basically had started to quit on me. I wasn't going to the hospital by any stretch because I knew what the doctors were going to say. They were going to tell me, and you need to quit drinking. You need to eat better and actually sleep. I mean, at one point in my late 20s, early 30s, I was 300 pounds or darn near anyway. I mean, I don't know exactly how much I weighed because, I wasn't real eager to get on a scale. But I definitely wasn't healthy. So in 2018, when I finally admitted to myself, or at least had other people force me to admit to myself that my liver I was at end stage liver failure when I finally showed up at the hospital, when I admitted to it. Yeah, it was pretty rough that spring, that's for sure. And so ended up in the hospital that week. It was January 10th of that week when my boss here at work actually forced me to go to the hospital. She didn't give me a choice because I was super sick. I was yellow. I was jaundice. My eyes were yellow. My skin was yellow. And she basically gave me an ultimatum, or not, I don't know if an ultimatum is the right word, but she gave me 3 options. I could get a ride to the hospital. She would give me a ride to the hospital, or she was simply going to call 911. Those were the options. And so all of which ended up seeing a doctor. And the short version of that next few months was my wife, Jamie, and I did the tour of hospitals here in Tucson. Because the first one I went to was for insurance purposes. They directed me where they wanted me to go. Well, let me back up. That's not true. The first one I went to was the Minute Clinic by my house because I was being stubborn. And that doctor took one look at me and said, I can't help you here. You need to go to an actual hospital is where you belong. Like, we fix broken bones, man. Like, we don't do. So the next day, I went to the hospital, and they worked on me for a couple of weeks. And the doctors there said, you're beyond our scope. We can't help you. You probably have a couple months to live, but we're going to send you over to this hospital down the way. So we went to that one for a couple of weeks, and they worked on me, and they said, there's nothing we can do for you. So now I've been in the hospital now for a month at that point or so, give or take. And they recommended this would have been now mid-ish February. They recommended a hepatologist, a liver doctor, here in town that is supposed to be, the liver docs of all liver docs here in Tucson. He is the specialist to go see. And I had 2 appointments with him. The first one was simply blood work, and he ran all sorts of tests. About 2 days later or whatever it was, we went into his office to get the results, and we spent 15 minutes in his office because he took a look at me and said, nothing I can do. You are too far gone. Get your affairs in order. At this point, 6 weeks, maybe less. Thank goodness I had Jamie in my corner, because word for word, she looked at him and says, that's not good enough. And we walked right out of the hospital. Well, I was in a wheelchair. She rolled me right out of the hospital, his office. So then we had kind of a family meeting the next day at my grandmother's house, which is where I was stationed, because I had to have pretty much 24-hour care. So somebody needed to be around me at this point. I was having a really rough day. I couldn't get out of bed. Family didn't know what to do. I couldn't keep my eyes open. I couldn't really move. I was in very, very uncomfortable amount of pain. Because at that point, when your liver fails, there's a fluid that fills up in your abdomen called ascites, and it's basically for kind of simplify it, your liver's leaks fluids into that open space. And so I was super big and round around my abdomen, and I couldn't really move, and I was hurting. And finally, my brothers came over, my dad was over, my mom was over. And to put that into context, the years leading up to that, my family relationships were not good. Alcohol had dissolved my first marriage. It had really ruined my relationships with my family, my parents, my siblings, my kids. And all of them were there in that living room having a family meeting. What are we going to do? And I had to go to bed. I went to the middle bedroom there, and I had to go lay down and fall asleep because I couldn't participate in that conversation. My sister, who was a nurse up in Colorado, was on the phone, and she basically told everybody, we're going to it's the university hospital here. It's Banner now, but it was always called UMC, which was not only our last true hospital to go to, was our last option, but it should have really been our first stop. They're a trauma 1 center here in town. And so we did. And I don't think they took me in the ambulance that day. They didn't. My brothers had to get me out of bed because I couldn't do it on my own. So they had to lift me kind of out of bed and get me to the car. And that's where I spent the next 2.5 months or so. The first couple weeks were still the same boat. The hepatology team there and the transplant team there told me no, that there was nothing they could do for me as well. That I needed to get my affairs in order and get, your final, I don't know what to call it, but affairs. There's another word for it.
Directive.
Yeah, advanced directives. Thank you. Yep. Trying to get those in order. And what ended up happening was there were 2 doctors that were my hospitalists. They were my internal medicine doctors. So they weren't part of the liver team. They aren't part of the transplant team. They were just there for my general care, so to speak. And they convinced the transplant team to take a risk on me after they had said no. They saw something in me. They got to know me as a person, I think. And I had things going for me. I was young. I was only 39 at this point. I actually celebrated a birthday in the hospital. Probably right around that time I met those guys. And so they convinced the transplant team that I was worth that risk, which is pretty special. I've had an opportunity to thank them for sticking their necks out for me, because without those 2 especially, there were so many different people that helped save my life, but they played a very, very pivotal role in it. Because with transplant patients, for me, there were 2 hurdles that I had to overcome. One is the transplant side of things. So when you are a transplant patient, you have to be the right amount of sick. Because if you're not sick enough, then somebody else needs that organ, whatever it is, more than you do, at least at that immediate moment. So you can wait. That's why they have the transplant list, and they kind of rank where people fall on it. If you are too sick, which is the side of the spectrum I tended to fall on, then you're not going to survive this surgery anyway. So we need to make sure your numbers get back in line before we even put you on the list. So that was hurdle number 1. Hurdle number 2 was actually the big one. The fact of the matter was I wasn't sober. But the only reason I quit drinking was because I went to the hospital. That quite literally is the reason. And I didn't have access to to alcohol or booze. The first, Jamie would tell you better than me, but the first 10 days or so, that first hospital, I was detoxing more than anything else. I don't remember it quite the same way she does. She says I would talk and not make any sense, and I would hallucinate things. I don't remember those moments, but I'll take her word for it. I'll make she make that up. And so that was the big hurdle that I had. And so when they finally convinced the transplant team that yes, we're gonna get you on the list, I had a whole list of requirements that I had to meet. The other problem is that typically, if you are a liver transplant candidate, specifically for substance abuse, whether it's alcohol or drugs or whatever it is, you have to complete that list for the year prior to being put on the transplant list. I didn't have that kind of time. And so I had to commit to them that I would do these things post-transplant. And finally, when we got all those kind of things in order, they put me on the lists. I was number one in this, at least in the state. I don't know if I was number one nationwide, but I was definitely high up on that list. And within about 2 weeks, they were able to recover a liver for me that was going to work. And that was on, when they recovered it, I guess it would have been March 21st of 2018. And that was the day that my body actually crashed. And I have a theory about that. Yeah, I was hours away from not being here. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. So what ended up happening was, so my body literally did crash. So I caught wind of, hey, we have a possible match for you. That surgeons, the surgical team, took a helicopter to Phoenix. I should say, I think it was Phoenix. I don't know a whole lot of details because a lot of that stuff is kept separate from the donor family and then the recipient families. They took a helicopter up to Phoenix to vet the liver, to make sure it was going to be viable and work for me. That's how recent it had come into the fold. And then once they gave the thumbs up and they said yes, they then moved me. At that point, I was in the ICU. I'll get to that here in a sec. They then moved me to the operating room to get prepped. Meanwhile, there was a private jet that now flew to actually, as the courier, to bring the liver back down to Tucson. When I was in the ICU waiting for them, the terminology is I was actively dying, where, all of a sudden now my body is now shutting down. And I was, to save you the gory details, but I was bleeding out from anywhere to bleed from. And the nurse, my ICU nurse, looked at Jamie at one point as I'm in and out of consciousness and, again, puking up blood and whatnot, said, this isn't sustainable. If we don't get this surgery in the next 4, 5, 6 hours, he's not going to make it. So it was pretty touch and go there. All right, I've been talking for 15 minutes.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, especially, so you were drinking the whole time up until you got into the hospital.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I guess I took the 2 days off prior to, so that the January 7th was a Sunday, and I didn't feel good. I only had a couple of drinks that morning, which for me it was an only, but I didn't feel good, and so I didn't drink that day. And then Monday I felt worse, and I didn't drink, and then Tuesday I felt worse. One of my employees here where I work, on that Tuesday before I went to the hospital, and she said it very tongue in cheek, but I looked like death, right? Warmed over.
Yeah.
She looked at me and she goes, Kelly, oh my gosh, are you dying? And I looked at her like, no, I'm not dying. Get back to work. But I was, and she hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
And again, it was tongue in cheek, but we were right there.
So at some point in all of that, even leading up to that, you obviously had some other physical symptoms. If you were in late stage, liver failure, you had other symptoms for the months and years leading up to that. And you knew that it was related to your drinking it at some point. Or I assume you did.
Yeah. So yes, there were symptoms when I look back. When they were going on, no, I just ignored them. Again, denial was a big factor in my world. You compartmentalize it. So the two major ones that I always think of was the December before that. I played, at that time I was playing, beer league softball, and I had slid for a ball at one point and really got some pretty good road rash, strawberries on my shin. They never healed. They never healed up. Even going into the hospital, probably was 7 or 8 weeks prior to, I still had scabs and stuff on my leg. And now knowing what liver failure looks like, what some of those symptoms are, that is absolutely what was going on, because your liver is responsible for your platelets and healing of cuts and injuries. So that's one. And then the prior summer before, Jamie and I had that's another factor of this whole story. Jamie and I just started dating. Like, we had just started dating about 6 months before I got sick. And we had taken a trip to California, where I had obviously was drinking, but for me, it was relatively tame. I was drinking all day, but it wasn't anything like it wasn't a bender by any stretch. But I had also had a bunch of red meat the night before, and I got these excruciating cramps right here in the center, which is right where your liver's at. Now, I didn't know at the time that's where your liver's at. I convinced myself and Jamie that was about a diverticulitis, even though it was a completely different spot in your stomach, right? Diverticulitis down here. Oh, but I had convinced me and her that that's what that was about, because I had issues with it, 10 years before, when I was super physically unhealthy. I'd had bouts of diverticulitis. I knew on some level that it was from the drinking, but again, I wouldn't admit it to anybody. The escalation, the acuteness, is that a word? I don't think that's a word, of how quickly
we'll say it's a word. We're runners.
I'm good with it.
We make them up.
It happened real quick, from the time I got sick to the time I couldn't function. I would just kind of plow through things. Then we can talk about that down when we get to the ultra running, because it's the same skill.
Well, so that's actually where I'm going to go to some degree, because you wake up in the hospital after you started bleeding out. They then obviously put you under. You had the transplant. Otherwise, you would not be talking to us today.
Right.
And you started with recovery, and you have two types of recovery that you've got to go through. You've got to go through the actual recovery of having a transplant and all the stuff that goes with that. I have a former sister-in-law who just had a heart transplant probably about 3 or 4 months ago, and there's a lot that goes on with it that after the recovery, right, are part of the recovery. So you've got that recovery that you're dealing with, but you're also missing your best friend of your beer. And so, how does, and I'm going to try to turn the corner on running a little bit, like, how does running enter the equation? Because I said you did a marathon 7 months later. So I don't understand how you can be recovering from the transplant, which isn't an overnight recovery. It takes some time, right? And then also losing your best friend to where I want to run a half marathon. Like, how do we get there?
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad you said best friend, because that's sure. What happened. That's exactly how to describe it. Here's your one companion. And so right after, I can't say right after transplant, really what happened, the moments after my transplant really are what, as you can probably guess, changed my life. My eyes opened, and my whole all of my family that could be there was in the ICU with me as I'm hooked up to the ventilator and all the different machines and whatnot. Man, it was amazing. I've got Jamie holding one hand. My sister, who I mentioned, flew in from Colorado. She's holding my other hand. My mom's there. My dad's there. My son's there. My oldest kid's there. And the amount of gratitude that came over me was just indescribable, that I had made it to the other side. And I didn't know what that meant. I just knew I felt it, right? The way I have described it in the past was I was the embodiment of that word. And so that kind of led down to a few weeks later, as I was trying to now put the pieces back together, physically and emotionally and mentally. So running sort of came into it, because what ended up happening as I healed physically, which was slow, I didn't know how to walk. I had to learn how to walk again. All my muscles had atrophied. I was 140 some odd pounds or whatever it was at the time when I got out of the hospital. And I am not a 140-pound guy. If I fell, somebody had to come get me. I couldn't get back up. If it was any sort of distance, I had to use a wheelchair. I couldn't walk that far. And so while I was recovering, I would set little goals. Like, one of my goals was, I'm going to walk from the front door to the mailbox and back. And I did that for a couple of days, and then I'm going to walk to the neighbor's house and back. And then pretty soon I'm down to the stop sign and back. And so we had those little incremental goals physically that were really starting to go well, and I was able to build some momentum that way. The emotional side, however, that took a few weeks to catch up. And so when I finally got back home on a full-time basis, I'm going through what's called smart recovery. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but smart recovery is same destination of sobriety as AA, very different vehicle on how we get there. So we're not at 12 steps. We don't have sponsors. That's not the route we take. We'll do ours is based off cognitive behavioral therapy. So we have worksheets and we work through irrational thoughts and things like that. So more therapy orientated, I guess, is a way to put it. And so what ended up happening was hiking came into my life. I've always been outdoorsy. I've always liked fishing and hiking and things like that, since I was a kid. Loved nature. And we have a mountain range right down south of us called Madera Canyon. Well, the canyon's called Madera Canyon. It's in the Santa Rita Mountains. And I found myself hiking out there multiple times a week. And each hike got to be, first one was a couple miles, and the second one was 3 or 4 miles. And then after about 2 months in there of hiking in there, then it was, now we're doing like 6 or 8 miles. But that summer, the reason I think I went there was not just the physical side of the hiking, but it was the spiritual side and the emotional side, because it was in a pretty dark place for those first few months, because I didn't have the emotional equipment to deal with what had just taken place. I'd never been this sober for 15 or 18 years, whatever it had been. And now I have this gift that I have been given that in my mind I did not deserve. Other people should have received my liver other than me. And so I was dealing with that. And I have the one coping mechanism that I've always had. And so I spent hours upon hours in Madera Canyon in those trails with me and me. Well, I would bring the mutt. He would come with me. He'd hike with me. But it was just me and my thoughts. No earphones, no nothing, just me and nature. And that was how I recovered and got to learn how to deal with and cope and be okay with what happened. And so as those hikes kept getting longer and longer and longer, finally in October of that year, so we're about 6 months, give or take, after transplant, I was hiking up a very backwoods trail. It's bushwhacking a lot of the way up. It's called Florida Canyon, so it's just east of where I normally went. It's pretty steep. It's about 7 miles up. It's pretty steep. And I get to the top, or pretty close to the top, and I called my sister. I was actually FaceTiming with her in Colorado because I wanted to show her the view of where I was, and holy cow, look where I'm at, and how beautiful, magical, and spectacular this place is. And so we share that moment, and I kind of do it. And she goes, "Well, I'm running the Rebel Marathon or half marathon next month. You should run it with me." That's 13 miles of, I can't do that. And she goes, "Well, Kelly, how long is your hike today?" And I said, "I don't know, it's gonna be 14 or 15 probably." And she goes, "And half of it's uphill? Yeah, we can do a Rebel half. You should do it with me." And I went home and signed up for it and ran my first half marathon. I'd never ran a race before in my entire life. And I went from 0 to a half marathon, which is kind of I figured out sort of my MO, I suppose. Because then I went from a half marathon to a 50K. I never ran a marathon, ran a 50K.
And I would imagine, like you said, that you were given this gift. It's a little bit different than like recovery on your own, because there's like this whole extra pressure that's outside of you, because it like almost had to flip a switch for you. Like that was it. It was like this or nothing. Pretty much.
Correct. Yeah. People, sometimes when I talk about it, people say, "Oh, well, you had to quit drinking. You didn't have a choice." No, I had a choice. It wasn't a good one. The only other option was I'm not here talking to you. That quite literally was the other option. And so, there was, pressure's a good word. The word I use is, and it's how I live now, is I have to earn this, every day. And the only way I know how to earn it is by helping other people. Because I truly believe the only reason that I'm still here talking is so that I can help other people. Because, the fact of the matter is these moments that I have, I believe that every moment I've had since I woke up from surgery doesn't belong to me. It belongs to my donor family. They belong to my donor. They belong to Jamie and the doctors and my family and my coworkers and the people I help at work and the foundation and all the different things that I do. That's why it's for them, and that makes me a better person for it. If that makes sense. I think I described that well.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think that's exceptionally powerful.
Yeah,
It's gotta be a bit of a catch-22 because as I'm listening to you talk about it, it feels almost as if you are stuck between two places. You're stuck between this idea of feeling like you don't deserve it, and yet also incredibly grateful for what you've been given. And it's hard to balance those two emotions because you can't go down either too far because the other one kind of pulls you back.
Sure. Well, I think that now I deserve this transplant now. And I did then too. I didn't believe it at the time, but now, no. Looking back now, like, no, I earned that
Good.
transplant. I deserve to be alive just as much as anybody else did. And so don't get me wrong, like that was those irrational thoughts that I mentioned earlier. That was part of that thinking when he first came out. No, now it's okay. Like, and I do a lot of work in the sobriety community when I talk to folks about that. And the past that got me to this moment, talking to you guys, no, man, it had to happen. It's just the way it had to happen. Had I not gone through all those trials and tribulations and sitting in the ICU room bleeding out, if that had never happened, gratitude and grace would have never happened, and we wouldn't have helped all the people that we've been able to help. And I mean, that butterfly effect, it's okay. I don't know that if I had a time machine, I don't know that I'd change it. I mean, I'd wish some of the hard parts didn't happen, maybe, and some of the emotional toll, but I don't know if I'd have changed anything.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's really good to hear. I mean, you have to be in that place. And so we're going to talk about your foundation that you've got called Grace and Gratitude. We want to definitely get to that as well. You know, you went from the half marathon to the ultra running world. You said it yourself that you bypassed everything else and you went to your first 50K. In the email that you sent us, you mentioned that ultras were always the goal. And so I guess before we get into the Arizona 300 and stuff, why did you want to run an ultra in the first place? Like, why was it always the goal, if you will?
Sure.
Especially after not even thinking you could do a half marathon.
Why? I don't know. I can tell you how, I suppose. So, that was 2018. I ran that half marathon, and it didn't happen quick. I tried to do a triathlon in 2019, and that didn't really happen. I wasn't able to train for it because my mom was going through her own alcohol journey at that time, and I was taking care of her, and I couldn't really train. And so then finally what ended up happening was in 2020, in the spring, I picked up a book from, you guys all know, by Charlie Engle called Running Man. And I read that book and his stories, and he's big in the sobriety world as well. And man, I related to that. And I read that book and I was hooked. I mean, I read that book in 24 hours. I don't know how long. It didn't take me long. I couldn't put it down.
Really?
And I remember when I finished that book, I looked at Jamie and said, I'm going to run 100 miles. And she says, she kind of looked at me like dumbfounded, going, people don't run 100 miles. And I'm like, no, they do. Watch it right here on page, whatever page it was, right here. And so that's how it all happened. And so that was in that summer. And I was an athlete as a kid. I played baseball pretty competitively as a kid. And so I said, all right, I'm going to start running. And then figured out very quickly, I don't know how to run. Like, I have a pair of shoes and a pair of shorts, and you hear it all the time on Instagram, like, that's all you need. That's not true at all. And it took me not very many weeks to figure out I need a coach. And so I Googled, run clubs in Tucson, and I found one called Southwest Endurance Training. And Autumn, shout out to Autumn, I called her up. She's the owner and coach at Southwest Endurance Training. I called her up and I told her I'm going to run 100 miles, and I naively said I want to run Leadville in a year, and that was my goal. And that's what she did. She laughed at me. She says she didn't laugh at me, but I remember the conversation. She sure did. She says, well, how about we get you to start running 5Ks and 10Ks and maybe another half marathon, and we'll go from there. And so I joined Southwest Endurance Training, and I've been a part of them ever since. I coach for them now. I help coach the Running Start program for the people that are just getting back to running or have never ran before. And so those have been some of the great. That was one of the greatest decisions I ever made, was joining that run club, because they're fantastic. So it was always 100 miles, but there were multiple steps I had to take between, not running anything and figuring out that 100 miles is a whole long way. And just on a side note, I still haven't ran a 100-mile race. I've attempted to, but I've DNF'd twice. Yeah, you go to my ultra sign up and it's listed right there, my DNFs. I wish they'd take that part down.
Well, you did run a 50K. So you ran a 50K in
run a
December
50K.
2021. As I recall correctly, you were using that as a training run for the Cold Water Scramble, if I recall correctly.
Cold Water Rumble. It was going to be my first 50 miler. And so I ran a 50K at the Tucson Marathon. It was they had a 50K option. That was the inaugural year for the Tucson Marathon. That's a Pam Reed race that she built, for years and years and years. They're a Vipa race now. They bought it. But that was the first year for the 50K, and I went out and ran it. And it's still my PR for a 50K. I did it in 6:50, I think is what I ran it in. It's still my PR for a 50K. And it was awesome. What happened on that 50K, because I trained, followed my training plan. I was listening to my coaches and did everything, to the book, to the number. And then I got to mile 28, which was easily as far as I've ever ran before. Man, I blew up. My legs said, we are done. We're not running anymore. This hurts. And so those last 3 miles took me, I don't even remember, an hour and 20 minutes, something like that. I mean, I was duffling and hobbling, and I'd try to run, and I'd make it 10 steps and be like, I got to walk again. And so that was a learning experience. One of my friends came and met me and walked me in the last, call it, mile. And she walked me in, and she was in her UFOs or whatever she was wearing as we were death stumbling to the finish line. It was pretty amazing.
Thanks for wearing your recovery sandals during my race.
Well, let's get into it. So I really want to hear the story of the Arizona 300. Now, you touched on the fact that you have not completed a 100-mile race. And so when we invite a guest to be a part of the show, we do a lot of stalking. We try to make sense of things about their background and stuff. Like, we'd followed some of your journey. Obviously, everybody at the time of Arizona 300 was coming out. You were posting about it as well. We're like, we're going to talk to Kelly. He's got an incredible background story you can kind of see through social media. So we talked about being on the show. We then did some more stalking. We realized, hey, how do you go from this 50K, maybe a 50 miler here and there, and primarily not do 100, but do this 300-mile race? Like I don't understand. So some context for those listening. You had attempted 2 100-mile races before, according to UltraSignup, the Javelina 100 in 2023 and the American Heroes 100-miler in 2022, both DNFs, according to UltraSignup. The longest race completed that we found was around 52 miles that we could find, and it was a Hot Foot Hamster in 2022, which is a 24-hour run. And so we're now trying in our brains to make sense of how Kelly decided he was going to sign up for a 300-mile race, knowing that you had a liver transplant, you had some issues with substance abuse and stuff, and we're thinking, who in the heck is Kelly Thrush that thinks, I think I'm going to sign up for the Arizona 300? Now, I want you to answer that question, but before I get into it, I want to make sure if you're listening, you don't know what the Arizona 300 is because you've been under a rock. It's a 300-mile point-to-point race in Arizona with over 41,000 feet of gain and loss, with a cutoff of 170 hours, which is 7 days and 2 hours. Kelly finished this race in 165 hours and 25 minutes and 4 seconds. So he had about 4.5 hours before the race cutoff.
Yeah.
So, first, why? On God's green earth, did you sign up and want to do, why was doing that race so important to you?
So I think how it all came to be was Candace Burke, who owns Destination Trail, and this is her brainchild, and it's part of the other, now it's a Grand Slam. I was going to say Triple Crown, but now it's a Grand Slam of 200s. She had started hinting towards this, and Candace, at least used to, I don't know if she still does, has a house here in Tucson, actually not very far from my house, and so she split a lot of her time there. And so when she was doing her world record of 50Ks in a row, a lot of those were ran in my backyard. And so, started to really follow her because she was quite literally running by my house. And so she started hinting towards this Sonoran Desert. She, at that time, didn't really say 200-plus mile race. At that point, didn't really know how far it was going to be. And it would have been in November of, if we were in 25 or 24, November of 23, she posted that she's going to do this, Arizona Monster. It's going to be 300 miles, thereabouts, in the Sonoran Desert. And I can tell you, I was sitting in my chair in my living room. Jamie was walking down the stairs as I'm watching this Instagram post. And before she hit the living room, I looked at her, I said, I'm running this race. And she goes, which race? And I said, don't ask questions. It's going to be super hard, and it's super long, and I may make it 20 miles or 50 miles, or maybe I get all 300. I have no idea, but I'm doing this race. I'm an Arizona kid. It's in my backyard. I'm pulled to it. because it's the inaugural year, right? And so I was in from the moment she said go. I signed up the day it went live, and then at that point we had about a year or so to train. And I'll use train with air quotes because then I suffered a knee injury and had to get surgery in the middle of all that.
Oh,
Yeah,
geez.
I know. And so, but yeah, I was hooked from the moment it went. And I get that question all the time. And they said, so wait a minute, so what's your longest distance? And that's, I went 85 miles at the American Heroes Run in 2020 or 2021. And they said, oh, and now you're going to do 300? And then when I start to explain my resume and go, look, I went from 0 to half to a 50K, mix in a couple of 100Ks in there as far as distance goes. Yeah, 300 makes the most sense. It's just, it's perfect sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, ultra runners are never, at the end of the day, we're never quoted as being the most logical. So
Correct.
I follow your logic.
Yeah, I think it sounds perfect. Now, as I have done this race, I am convinced that the longer distance, the 200 plus multi-day events are play to my strengths, right? Don't get me wrong. There are the elites that do these, like Peter Mortimer finished that race in 80 hours, which was half the time it took me,
Incredible.
And it's amazing. And so, but for us party pace people, it plays to my strengths, right? I don't have to be super fast. I have to not stop. There's no time to waste. You're moving the entire time. But hiking is right up my alley. Climbing big mountains is right up my alley. And getting out there where it's a lot of suffering is right up my alley. And so these multi-day adventures really do play to some of the strengths I have. So I think they're going to be kind of my, if you want to call 200 plus miles my bread and butter, which is what I was about to say, but
No, I completely get that, because sometimes the cutoffs during the 100 milers are a little bit, tighter than they would be for the 200 plus. So what's your, at the start line, what are you thinking?
The start line, I was mentally ready to go. I was chomping at the bit. Like, let's go. 3 or 4 days prior to that, it was, what the heck am I doing, man? That's like I'm traveling half the state of Arizona on foot. And then all those voices of you've DNF'd 200 rate, I don't have an official 100K. I don't have an official 50 miler. I don't have any of that stuff. Why on earth are you out here doing this? And that I didn't have a full training block, because I had knee surgery in late October of 24 to repair a meniscus and clean up about 6 months. Steve, I see you're doing the math there.
Yeah.
So about 6 months prior to the start line, I had to have knee surgery. And so I really didn't start training until December.
Wow.
And, all of those doubts are just loud. Once I got to the start line, man, I was ready to go. Let's do this and see what happens. Off we go. My crew makes fun of me because I had written, man, this detailed, beautiful race plan. I knew where I was going to be. I knew, what I was going to eat. I knew how much sleep I was going to get day to day. That blew up very, very quickly.
Throw that right out the window as soon as the start happens.
Yeah, it did take long at all for me to figure out, well, that's not going to work. They still make fun of me for it. Now, my defense for that race plan is I finished exactly when I said I was going to finish, like within minutes. And so then that's, of course, what I tell my entire crew is, what are you talking about? It worked perfect. We were right there. Anyhow.
I mean, I think it's a good exercise to have those plans. You need those plans, but then you also have to be able to pivot when it's not going to plan. So that's what
we
I talk to all my athletes. Like, you have to go in with some sort of a plan, especially for your crew, or even if you're doing it solo. But then also not be as tied to it to where you're stressing if you don't hit what you're supposed to be hitting.
That was me at the beginning of day 2. I sent a text. We're all, the crew's all in a group text. I am now at that point 4 or 5 hours behind where I was supposed to be, and the only reason I'm 4 or 5 hours behind is because I didn't sleep. Right, I took all my rest and gobbled that up, and so I sent on this group plan like, hey, we're gonna have to make some adjustments because I'm not gonna make what I said I was gonna make today, because day 2 was supposed to be a big day. and there was more climbing than I had anticipated in this chunk section of where we were at. And it took some very strong words from two of my crew members to be like, we'll make the adjustments. Your whole goal is make it to the next cutoff or you get kicked out. Like, that's all you need to be thinking about. We'll handle the rest. And it took them telling me that a few different times for me to let go of those expectations of that race plan and to not stress about it. And then to realize I have one job, and it's to get to the next checkpoint, get to the next aid station, don't get cut off, and just keep on moving forward. So
I find the whole thing overwhelming. So from a logistical standpoint, I mean, I get the idea of planning on logistics because, I do 100-mile races. I don't do the 200 plus or anything, and I don't do multi-day. I mean, mine are going to go to the next day, and we're going to be home, at some point. And so I do plan my races out. I have an A goal, B goal, C goal, and all that kind of stuff. And my C goal is typically, or my A goal typically, I do my goals in reverse. My A goal is to finish, and then they get harder, right? And so I want everybody to know that, like, your A goal needs to be finished if that's your goal, right? But anyhow, I would not be good at that. Like, I feel like for a 300-mile race, I would have to have all the logistics worked out because I have so many people relying on me of getting to the next spot. And so it's almost as if you're going to do logistics. You almost have to plan them out in blocks. Like, from this aid station to the next aid station, this is our logistics. And I don't know what the time's going to look like, but here's the plan within this space of time, and just kind of have these pieces or mini plans along the way that can then be tweaked. And otherwise, it's overwhelming to me. The thing that you said earlier that I think is fascinating, because I've never thought about it this way, is you said that this sounded like the race for you because you knew your strengths. And a lot of times people approach a race nervous about what they can do or not do in a race. And you instead understand personally what your strengths are and have applied that to the race that fits you, as opposed to saying, I really want to run this race and let's see what happens. It's like you did it the opposite way, I think, than a lot of people do. And so you mentioned your strengths for climbing, big hills, and suffering.
Those are them, and they all kind of interchange, right? Because you're going up this
I
mountain.
think you nailed it.
Yeah, it's gonna kind of stink if you're trying to hurry up this mountain. And I use hurry as a very loose term, my version of hurry. But I do those types of things just for fun anyway. We have a hill here in Tucson called Tumamoc that's pretty steep in parts. It's 1.5 miles up or 1.4 up, and it's like 700 feet of vert. So, and we'll go back and just do it just because it's there. It's on my way home, But yeah, I think that's the key. You have to know, like, if somebody says, hey, I'm going to set a goal for you. If a coach were to walk up to me and say, hey, we're going to set a goal, you're going to qualify for Boston. That it's just not in the cards, it's just not. And that's okay. I'm never going to dunk a basketball either. Like, they're the same thing. But I do enjoy doing these things. The suffering piece of it, I'm good at. Again, it's a skill set, I think, that you can work on. And so finding the race that met those things that I was good at, boy, that sounds like fun. Let's go out and do those.
I'm going to pause you here, because if I'm listening to this episode and I'm running and I'm hearing, this guest talk to Jeff and Steve, and he's like, suffering is a skill you can learn. I'm going to be mad at Steve or mad at Jeff if I don't ask the question.
I was going to ask
do you learn? Yeah, like, how do you learn the skill of suffering?
Sure. So there's some tools that I got. One, my history with alcohol abuse it plays a big role in that, because the skill to that, to let's say drinking beer, right? Especially when it gets to be a problem, you are hyper focused on that. It controls your thoughts throughout the day, like, especially if you're trying to hide it from your family or hide it from your job or whatever you're doing. That's really all you ruminate on throughout the day. And most of your actions get you to that goal, right? Like, oh, this is when I can get to here. This is how I can finish here so I can go start drinking, and whatever the scenario is for that particular day. Same idea when you're in the middle of, let's say, a 300-mile race and you have to make it to the next aid station and everything hurts, right? I wasn't going to just quit willy-nilly, on that other side of my life. So we can't do it here either. And so you learn how to, I don't know if cope's not the word I'm looking for. You learn how to accept and, in some level, enjoy that pain that comes along with it. It's comforting, I guess, is a good word to use, I guess. when you are hurting that way, but you know you have to get to the next point or whatever it is, like that is the goal, and failing at that is not an option. So that's part of the skill set, right? There's a good baseline there. The other tool that I use quite often, because I still have those voices in your head that tell you to quit, or, you know, that, oh, this is good enough, right? Like, you don't have to keep going. Everyone's going to be proud of you because you did 150 miles, you know, like that's twice as far as you've ever gone before. Like, everything about that is a win, other than it's not the goal you set out for, right? And so when those moments get really super hard, a tool that I use that I think everybody probably can to some degree, or at least their version of it, is I will go back to some of those memories that aren't pleasant from when I was deep in addiction or coming through my transplant, that are ones that I'm not proud of. Maybe I'm the only one that even knows them, right? But I'll go into those memories and really go into them. I mean, feel the emotions again, not just think about it fleeting, but really dive deep into them. And however long that memory lasts, you know, that 20 minutes or 15 or whatever it is, when I come out, man, this ain't that bad. I signed up for this race. I did this on purpose. And if I can survive that, this is a walk in the park, you know? And so that really helps. One of my favorite words, it puts things in perspective of where we're at. Like, this pain that I have in my feet for the last 100 miles is temporary. It's going to go away. And I signed up for it. This is what I want to be here. You know, the old adage, I get to do this. I don't have to do that. I get to do this. So those are two of the tools that I really try to take with me on all of it too. It could be a training run. It could be a 5K Tuesday morning. You got, you know, those middle of the week miles that you got to get that just aren't terribly fun. I use those all the time. You know, like, no, you get to do this today, and this is going to lead you to your next step, whatever those are.
I think you said that you had a good word there, and I think it was acceptance. Because I have a lot of clients and just people in general ask me, like, how do you keep moving when everything is hurting? And I really didn't have a good answer for them until now when you said acceptance, because you just kind of accept that this is what it is, and it's not always going to be like that.
Yeah.
And you can, if you pull the plug early, you're going to feel better. But then, and that's what I always try to tell them too, like, if you plug early, you're going to feel better kind of immediately. Why wouldn't you want to just feel that, like, at the end? Just push a little bit forward through and then feel that at the end, and just accept that this is what it's going to be for the next, whatever, maybe 75 miles, maybe 2 miles.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that immediate relief that you feel, like, all right, I'm done. I'm going to kick off my shoes. At least for me, how it's gone every time, you immediately feel good, right? Like, oh gosh, I'm sitting in a chair, my shoes are off. Within seconds, I wish I was back out there. I mean, within seconds, I should be back out on the trail. It happens at the end of training runs. You know, one of my buddies, we were talking about the monster leading up to it. And every time I get out of the mountains, or it could be after rim to rim in the Grand Canyon, which is super hard, right? It doesn't matter the distance, but as soon as I'm at the truck, I wish I had spent more time back out on the trail. And I was going to utilize that during the monster, because that's an absolute emotion where, gosh, I wish I was still going. I got my wish. Don't get me wrong. At the end of the monster, I'm good. I didn't need to do it anymore. I'm fine. We're all done now. But that emotion helped carry me through on each one of those days. You know, you sleep for an hour. Okay, well, you got your wish. We're going back out there for another 36 before the next, you know, rest break that you get.
So I'm curious about something. You had surgery 6 months before the monster. And a lot of people are going to be thinking, train. Like, what am I doing about training? And so if you could look at those 6 months from the time you had surgery to the time of the race, like, what did you and your coach focus on? Like, what was the non-negotiable? What is the one thing above all that you were going to focus on? Because there's only a limited time, this window. You're not going to be able to go through the full development cycle of getting built up for this race. So what did you guys focus on specifically?
Yeah, out of the gate, it was don't do too much out of the gate, because I have tendency to do that. If you look at my personality, it's an all or
little OCD. That's good.
Yeah, there's a little attic brain in my head where, you know, more is better, right? And so that was the first hurdle for me mentally, was not to, we got to ease back into this. So we set pretty strict mileage caps, not even goals. Like, okay, week number 1, I don't remember what they are now, but week 1, number 1, you're going to walk a total of whatever it was, 12 miles this week. And that's it. Nothing else. Flat walk, not at pace, stroll, whatever you want to call it. And that's all we're going to do. And we're going to build from there. And so then as my knee became stronger and healthier again, we knew we didn't have super lot of time to get lots and lots of miles each week, because you have to build to that. You know, I couldn't do weeks of 70 to 100 miles per week. So what we ended up doing was a lot of vertical gain. So instead of doing lots of runs, because I knew I wasn't going to run much of the monster, I was going to hike 97% of it. So Tucson, if you've never been here, is surrounded by 9,000-foot peaks on 3 of the 4 sides. And they're beautiful mountain ranges. And so it was just, on this Saturday, we're going to go hike up this mountain for 16 miles. And that's what you're going to do today. And it was time on feet and vert that you can get during those. The other thing we tried to do, a big one, were the blocks. So, and sleep deprivation, try to train a little bit and get my mind and body used to that. So Friday nights would be, a lot of times Friday nights would be a trail run for 8 to 12 miles, whatever it is, starting from, like, let's say 8 p.m. to midnight or whatever the times were. Come home, sleep for a little bit, and now you're going to go do a long hike from 4 a.m. till noon or even longer. That's going to be your Saturday. And then Sunday, you're going to do a medium size mileage, whether it's running or hiking or whatever it might have been, and kind of cram and condense those miles into a 48-hour time frame. So that was a big one that we focused on. Time on feet was one of them. And then I think the advantage that I had that really worked out well, that I'm going to take into training for Cocodona. Oh, I'm on the wait list for Cocodona. And so is I had already been on 90% of the monster trail before we even got on the start line. That was a huge advantage.
That's huge.
Psychologically was huge advantage. I knew what was coming, which takes a little bit of the adventure out of it, because I knew it was coming. But in the middle of, say, climbing Mount Lemmon, which is, we had, I don't remember the totals, but it's like that, when the climb starts, it's 6,000 feet and 14 miles, I think is what the total was, something like that. Over rocky and rough and pretty darn technical terrain. The one place, they say it's a fire road. It ain't a fire road, man. They just blew up, it blew up rocks, and that was it. So anyway, it took some of the adventure out of that, but knowing that's what was coming and knowing that I still had 2 miles to go, and it felt like, this is a false summit. You're not there yet. You got to keep on plugging through. Huge advantage. And so I'm going to hopefully be able to do that over the course of this year for Cocodona as well, and be on 90%, if not 100% of the trail before we even toe the line.
Yeah, well, we saw your number 48 on the wait list.
Yeah, hopefully.
You'll get in.
I hope so.
You'll get in. Yeah. I would suggest seeing the trails too. That's a huge advantage.
Yeah.
And then also, I think it was super smart, because this is what I do with my clients who are taking on like a race that has high elevation, was not focusing on mileage. It's focusing on that elevation gain, where we try to gain whatever the distance is, whatever the elevation gain is for the race. I try to get them to do that in their weekly blocks for the peak weeks, with like a big elevation gain on a Saturday or Sunday. So I think that was super smart.
Yeah. And it's what I enjoy doing. I'd be doing that in my spare time anyway, right? If I have a day off, that's where I'm going. I'm going to go climb that ridge line that I've never been on before. Might as well work it into your training plan.
That's awesome. Listen, time is flying real fast. I noticed, I looked at the clock here, and I thought, God, there's so many things I still want to talk about. And so I'm going to switch gears a little bit, only because I want to make sure that we give those who are listening just a little bit of information about this organization or foundation that you have.
Sure. So gratitude and grace, wow, it is a labor of love. I knew after transplant, really in the hospital, although I couldn't have verbalized it at the time, but I knew I had to give back. When I was in the ICU, actually, what I started doing, Jamie and I, was I wanted to tell transplant patients who were going to come after me kind of what to expect, and the stuff that the doctors don't talk to you about, right? Because there's lots of that stuff. Because they tell you all this information, but they don't tell you how you're going to feel. And they don't tell you the little different things about your body that are going to change. And so we started documenting some of that stuff. I'd take pictures of like the different tubes that were in me and what they were doing, and, you know, kind of explaining it in layman's terms on what to expect. Now, little did I know that stuff already existed. I had no idea until after we started doing it. But nonetheless, I knew I needed to give back. So over the course of the next couple of years, knew I had to, but didn't know what that was going to look like. And the way it really kind of all sort of organically came to be was, one, I didn't share my story for the first 2 years or so after transplant. I was embarrassed and ashamed. And a lot of those words you hear about people, especially just into recovery, because it was embarrassing for me. And I was disappointed in myself and where I was. And so I didn't talk about it. And as the years at that point went by, I started sharing a little bit more and a little bit more. And what I realized was, man, my story is able to help people. And so I would share some more. And then Jamie, again, who is fairly introverted and, you know, doesn't like to be in the spotlight, she started sharing things, and she started sharing parts of the recovery story that I had never heard before, specifically when it came to our financial struggles. You know, there were points during recovery when after transplant, I spent Monday through Friday at my grandmother's house. That's where I lived, Monday through Friday. And my mom was there to help take care of me. And then on the weekends is when I went home. That way Jamie could work, right? And what I didn't know was there were weeks where she would turn off the electric to save those pennies Monday through Friday.
Wow.
And then have it turned back on when I came home on Saturday and Sunday. And then she would turn off the water, or we would skip a car payment or whatever. I mean, multiple different things just so we could make sure we floated by. Because the minute I went into the hospital, 50% of our income was gone out the window, just disappeared, right? And the mortgages still due, the car payments were still due. So as we started sharing those stories, realized that's how we can really give back to folks. And so that's how Gratitude and Grace came to be. And so we help support financially, emotionally, communally, transplant patients and their families, as well as folks in substance abuse recovery as well. And so I'll give you a great example of one we're working on currently. We had a gentleman, I believe he lives in Phoenix, that is a transplant patient up in Phoenix. He got his transplant, I think, last fall at some point. Hasn't been able to work. Just received an eviction notice and they give him 5 days total.
Yeah.
And so we got that alert on what's today? Thursday. So we got that alert on Tuesday. We sent it to the board yesterday, and we're going to get his rent paid this month so that he can at least be there for June. And then hopefully, I don't know what this is going to look like, but we're going to work with him so that we can avoid this in July. Like, okay, we're gonna stop the bleeding for this month, but how do we make sure we're not doing this again in 4 weeks? That's what we do. We had one lady that we were able to turn her lights back on for right before it got hot in the summer in Phoenix, because her electric had been turned off, and the electric company wouldn't take any payments from her except in full and in cash, because there was some delinquency and things like that. But they were not negotiating. And she couldn't do it. You know, she's a transplant patient. She's not allowed to work. There is no income coming in unless you get into disability and some of those other programs that you can have some income coming in that don't cover all of it. They pay some, but they don't cover everything. And so that's what we do. And then what I'm most proud of, I can't say most, what I'm also proud of is through Gratitude and Grace is building that community between the supporters and the donors and the people we help. We have a number of different events here where everybody comes. And so the donors get to meet the people they help, and they get to thank the people that made it possible when most of the time those worlds wouldn't collide. And that is really cool to watch when that happens. That's pretty special stuff.
I think that's an amazing foundation. And like you said, sometimes you don't see a lot of that too. A lot with the medical side of it. You don't see the people who are doing the caretaking, what they go through. And then just the bills and everything with it. You just kind of hear about it as like ancillary, but you don't see the real struggles. And I think it's really great that you're helping out with that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing stuff. It's been great. And so we're still new. We're still small. We've only been around for less than 2 years. We're coming up on 2 years here in a couple months. So we're mostly local here to Tucson and Phoenix, but momentum's picking up. I mean, just this year alone, I don't even know what we've helped this year so far, like probably 10 or 12 families that we've helped out, something like that. It's been amazing. And the people that I've been able to meet and people we've been able to help, it's just, I could talk on and on and on about it. It's good. It's good stuff.
It's great. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a really awesome organization. And you come at this with, you have two stories, right? You're a transplant survivor. You're also a substance abuse survivor. I mean, you kind of have gone through both. And so if people are listening, they're going to either resonate because they know somebody or they personally have gone through a transplant, or they know somebody or personally are dealing with substance abuse. So, and at the end of the show, we're going to get you like your contact information. We're going to put that in our show notes and everything. And we'll also put the foundation, Gratitude and Grace. I think I've been calling it the opposite order. So it's Gratitude and Grace Foundation. We'll put the links in that as well. But if I'm listening and I'm curious about just information about recovery, even for substance abuse, is it okay if I reach out to you, or what would you say to me? What would you say to me if I said, I'm not sure who to talk to or what to do, and I'm not sure if I really have a problem?
My immediate question was, what's going on? And
right.
I just let you start talking, and then because everybody's different, right? Not every resource out there is the right one for everyone. There is a resource out there for everybody, but you have to kind of figure out which one it is. Like, for example, I mentioned it earlier, AA has helped millions of people, maybe tens of millions. I don't even know the number over the years. And it's a fantastic organization. It's not the only one. And it didn't work for me. I tried AA, way back when. Now, granted, I wasn't ready to be sober yet or have my hand forced, as it were. But Smart Recovery did resonate with me. It hit, for whatever reason, the process was exactly what I needed. And so that would be the first thing. So, you asked the question, Jeff, just now, like, can I reach out to you, me? And first off, to anybody listening, absolutely. You'll get my email or my Instagrams or whatever else. Yes, please reach out. If you have questions or are suffering or know somebody that is, I'm very accessible, and we'll kind of talk through it and figure out what the next steps are and go from there.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, so, I used to drink myself. I haven't drank in, 20 years now, just personal decision. But when you said earlier that you didn't want to go to the doctor because you knew they were going to tell you that you couldn't drink. When I sit here and I tell somebody who's listening, hey, if you're not sure what to do, you should, and you're not sure if you should quit or whatever it is, or you want to talk to somebody about recovery, you know what they're thinking? I don't want to talk to Kelly. And if I talk to Kelly, it's because then I have to figure out if I want to do something about it. And so I'm actually saying it this way again, because I know that's the wrestle point, is that to say I'm going to reach out to somebody is actually the hardest step they will ever take. And so, we're not a recovery type podcast or anything like that, but there are a lot of people that in our ultra running community, Steve and I have discussed that there's a huge correlation between us OCD folks, us addictive personality folks, us like to live on the extremes of life folks, and use of pharmaceuticals. And so, I don't know how else to say it, but there is a strong correlation. And so it's a real thing in our sport. It's a real thing in running, because most races end with let's grab a beer at the end. And so, I'm not going to, preach to the choir or preach about it at all, to be honest with you. It is a thing that some people struggle with, and it's not something that I think anybody should be alone with. I think people should feel comfortable talking about it and do with what they want. So that was it. I was just curious.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah.
That's my soapbox. Any other questions for Mr. Kelly before we go to Coach's Corner, Steve?
Nope. Just that I learned something every time we do this. I didn't know that there was other organizations besides AA. I just always thought like, hey, you got to go to AA or NA or something like that. But it's cool to see that there's other organizations out there.
Yeah, there's quite a few different ones. I mean, Smart Recovery obviously is the path that I took, and I'm a facilitator for them. I haven't done groups in quite some time since COVID, but I do a lot of one-on-one type stuff with folks, which is, the people I enjoy? No. The people that I really appreciate working with are the ones, Jeff, that are struggling to pick up the phone, right? Mm-hmm. Those are the ones I appreciate the most, because I remember those days vividly, And so, no, man, we're just going to talk about it. I'm going to ask questions. You can ask questions. I'll tell you all my stories, and one of them's going to relate, And there's no judgment, because I've been there, done that. And, and so it's, let's figure out what the best solution is, and for some people like myself, abstinence is the only solution. It doesn't work any other way for me. There are other people that maybe you can drink a beer and be fine and be done. I don't understand that because I don't live that way. Mine is, you have one and you might as well finish the entire case. That's how I ran. But that's not the only thing. So we'd sit there and chat and figure it out.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah,
That's great. Yeah, it's
there's
awesome.
always, there's always that fear of it being a judgment zone and everything, and it's not. I mean, most of the time, if you talk to me about it, I'll just say it's just hard. Like, and I think that's what resonates is that it is hard. And like, if we can at least agree with that, we can move forward. But Steve, I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you.
No, I was just saying that's great. That was great.
Well, so Kelly, one of the things we do as we get close to the end of our show is we do a segment we call the Coach's Corner, and it comes to us because a listener will ask us a question, excuse me, that we like to read as part of the show. And as host, Steve and I answer the question. We also invite our guests to answer as well. There are no right or wrong answers. We don't get judged on this either because sometimes they're hard. But today's question comes to us from Regina, who lives in balmy Phoenix, Arizona.
I wouldn't even say balmy. It's just downright hot.
Yeah,
Some people call it hell because it's so hot, but let's move on. Regina's question to us, she said, here in balmy Phoenix, Arizona, summer is upon us. I usually consider this my off season, and I just try to maintain some base mileage until temps start to back off in October. But I would love, no noises, Steve, but I would love to be able to do a build block where I focus on speed. Any advice on how to structure speed work into my runs when I'm mostly just trying to survive? Now, there's more, and I'm going to come back to it because there's a long one here. For context, I'm a restaurant manager that works nights, so I can't get out any earlier than 8 a.m., and I have to have enough gas in the tank to work 50 hours on my feet. Treadmill isn't really an option. I am diligent about hydration, water, and electrolytes, nutrition, and use all the cooling techniques, such as cooling sleeves, ice bandanas, etc. But hot is hot. And once we get into constant triple digits, I still just feel zapped, even doing easy runs. She then apologizes for the length of the question, but let me say it this way. She would love to be able to do a build block where she focuses on speed, and any advice we have on how to structure speed work into runs with somebody who is living in a place that's hotter than hell, has no access to run during the morning or late at night because of her schedule, and does all the cooling techniques. Yes, Steve, what you got?
Oh, I was going to let you go first because I don't want to steal yours, but I would say, like, one, if I were coaching Regina, I'd say, one, why? Like, is there something that's coming up? Well, is there something that's coming up, you know what I mean, in the fall that you have to prep speed now, where you can't just do base mileage? Or is it that you just want to work speed in there just to work speed in there? Because if it can be moved, I would think the easiest thing would be to move it. But I'll let Jeff go on like how he would handle actually putting it in training. Because you had a good response when we talked about it the other day when we were prepping. So like I said, I don't want to steal it from you. But my immediate thing would be why, and then you should just move it or run laps underneath the shade somewhere.
I do believe that when we first talked about this and I read it, I did say that she should move out of Arizona to do this.
You move.
But I think it's a real question. And Regina, we're kind of having a little bit of fun, but it's got to be a challenge for everybody who lives in Arizona when it's hot. Like hot is hot. And we can talk about dry heat, wet heat, hot, humid heat. I don't know. It is just hot. But speed work, the beauty of speed work is that it is a shorter type event. And so you don't have a lot of time to spend outside because you're going to burn up, like you said. But what you can do is if you want to do speed work, I would do very, very short intervals. Now, if I'm going to prescribe a VO2 max workout or a lactate threshold workout for runners here, they're going to have a bit of a warm-up period of maybe 20 to 30 minutes, right? I wouldn't do that here with you, Regina. What I would do is a total of 30 minutes in the entire run workout because you're not worrying about doing any kind of volume. You've been clear on that. And so I would do short intervals where you're only going for like 4 or 5 intervals, maybe like 30 seconds to just kind of blitz, maybe up to a minute, and then coming back and cooling off. Now, in those recoveries, I would give yourself about a minute to 2 minutes recovery at a dead space. I would not float those recoveries. I would not do an easy run during those. It would be a just bring everything down, heart rate as well. Get your little cooling towels out, drop them on your head or whatever. But just to give you the time to kind of get that turnover over the legs. Now, it's not a lot, but it does help you with some speed work. Now, if you want to also do volume, I would do 2-a-days, twice a week. So I would add in another short run of maybe 3 miles to get a little bit of volume under your legs. So you got a 30-minute interval session, and then maybe that evening you got a 30-minute to 45-minute easy, light, super easy, low RPE run to get some volume in there as well. But that's it. And I would not be aggressive with it because the heat's going to take everything out of you. It's going to take everything out of you. No pressure, but since you live in Arizona, Kelly.
No, I'll jump in. I love talking about training in the heat. So the first thing that I tell runners about training in the heat is, one, yes, it's possible. However, recognize that, Regina, your speed workout in December times for the same effort for your speed workout in July are not going to be the same. Your body is already working harder just stepping outside in the heat. So understand that. But that's a hard mental thing a lot of times. Like, well, when I ran this last time in December, I was running whatever your splits were, right? So understand that your RPE for July, the pace is going to be probably significantly slower in July than it was when you were doing it in December. So if you can get through that hurdle, okay, that's step number one. The second thing is training in the heat makes you a better runner in the winter. Your heart and lungs are stronger for it. And we can get, and I actually don't know all the science between the elevation and the heat and, the oxygen in the air and so forth, but there's something formula there. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is, you can train in the heat. You got to be careful. Don't go out and, 112 degree heat and run a marathon with no water. But if you're doing short blocks,
Yeah, summer training gives you the fast fall races. So it's important to get the time in during the summer. Again, I'm not sure if I would approach it from a speed standpoint, but if you are, short intervals, nothing long, and obviously paying attention to being hydrated all the time. Well, that was Coach's Corner, Regina. It was a great question. It was a lot to it, so we do appreciate you sending in, but thank you for that. If you're listening to the episode and you've got questions yourself or anything that you're curious about, just feel free to send it in. You can send it to me or to Steve through Instagram or to our Blueprint to Ultra podcast Instagram account. We would love to hear from you. And so thank you, Mr. Thrush, for being with us today. We really appreciate you and think that your story is absolutely incredible. Love what you're doing with Gratitude and Grace as well. It's just another extension really of your story. And I think of who you are and what you've gone through. And so I think it's an incredible thing. And congratulations to Jamie for sticking through this with you as well. And so I know she may be listening to this and you said you always talk about it. Well, let's at least compliment her for being the strength, the anchor, the foundation that you kind of sent her to kind of get through some of the things and the necessary piece. And I think that's just something that's incredibly honorable about her as well. And so kudos for you and you both. We appreciate you being with us today, though.
Absolutely. That was perfect,
thank you.
Man. Thank you guys very much for having me on today. It was fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, time flies.
Flying by. Yeah, it sure does.
It goes so fast. All right, so last call for action for those listening. Please do us a favor. If you liked the episode, make sure to leave us a comment, hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe either through Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast, or if you're watching us over on YouTube, you can do that too. We'd love to have you be a subscriber there as well as we're growing that channel. But thank you so much for being with us and plugging us in your ears, and enjoy the rest of your run. And Mr. Thrush, thank you as well. We will talk to you again soon. See ya.